Be vocal. This is the time to be vocal. You know, everybody's been so quiet and polite in Evanston because it is a comfortable place to live. I mean, I've lived in other cities. This is by far one of the safest, cleanest, nicest places I've ever lived. But we do have some issues. That pernicious type racism, that institutional racism is a problem. And then the corruption that we're seeing is affecting everybody. The conversation was at one point, Black people are being priced out of Evanston. Well, look, everybody's getting priced out of Evanston right now. It's a problem.
I started this organization, Shorefront, almost 20 years ago. But it also started out as a grassroots movement starting in 1995, based on one simple mission: controlling your narrative. What I found in area, local, historical organizations and institutions, when I ask about the Black experience, I get the misrepresentation of a dialogue of Black people in the North Shore who are only domestics and servants. I knew that was wrong. So it was Shorefront's goal to create not only a real narrative, but also produce documents that demonstrate that. So how many of you heard of an archive before? Show of hands. Archives are one of the #1 places where people go to do research, to find things about their communities, about movements. We're almost like radicals. We have this information, and not just for the here and now, but going back 10 years, 50 years, 100 years, how far we can go back. And when I see this type of discussion here, this is not the first time at Evanston when people mobilize to fight against the system. Evanston had to fight Jim Crow, and Black residents in Evanston started that fight as early as 1903. In fact, we might even say that we started in 1865. Illinois was almost slated as a slave state. Instead, Illinois adopted the Black codes, which was like a step above slavery. But imagine at this time in the early 1800s, where if you're a Black person in the state of Illinois, you had to be registered. You had to show your card, your license. That registration cost as much as $1,000. This is early 1800. If you did not have that, you would get arrested and sold back into slavery, or assigned to a family as an indentured servant for the remainder of your life. If you had kids, your kids would be an indentured servant. Girls until the age of 18, boys until the age of 25. It was illegal, basically, if you were not registered in the state of Illinois, it was illegal to live in the state of Illinois. So that's our jump start. And I want to make sure that information was out there so we understand when we talk about progress. Progress was stymied from the very beginning. Evanston likes to tout itself as this great, beautiful community to live in where it's safe and sound. But Evanston, just like the rest of this country and many parts of the world, practiced Jim Crow, practiced segregated policies, and Shorefront wanted to create a record where people can see how long the struggle has been going. It was not unusual to see in the early 1900s headlines that said in the newspaper, the Jim Crowing of Evanston. Residents fight back. The NAACP chapter of NAACP was formed in, 1912? Something like that. Evanston had a chapter as early as 1918. We were fighting from the beginning, and we continue to fight as we lose our history, as we lose our presence. So the more we work with residents in the community and share their story, we're putting that narrative back into the hands of residents that live that experience. We have a permanent record where people can come back and showcase and show and re-research the information and the struggles that families have gone through for decades. That is the mission of Shorefront. And we bring that mission not just only here in Evanston, but across the nation. We have become a model for what a community-based archive can do to help inspire and mobilize groups, like everybody here in this audience and at this table, to continue to do good work.
My movement started before I was running, but it really got off the ground when I started running for clerk. And I began my campaign talking about Freedom of Information Act and elections, and that's what I ran on. And what we really put forward was the idea that residents here in Evanston should have the power to lead our government, to understand what's going on in government. And so we put forward a plan to make our city more transparent by increasing access to the Freedom of Information Act, and increasing access to the ballot. One of the first things that we did was we started focusing here in the 5th Ward on increasing voter turnout. The 5th Ward has the lowest voter turnout in the entire city, and has historically had the lowest voter turnout. And so what we started doing is we got on the ground, we started a text message campaign, we started knocking on doors, we started hosting community events to get more folks involved in local government. And what we have seen is, while the 5th Ward hasn't become the top voter turnout ward in the city, but we have seen a slight increase in voter turnout here in the 5th Ward and in the city, and particularly with early voter turnout. We've really made a push to get folks to early vote because it's very convenient to have a centralized location where you can go and vote and you don't have to figure out what your local polling location is. And that's one of the things we've led on. With FOIA, we've really worked to make sure that folks have better access to information, and so that we've taken a role of advocacy within the clerk's office. And that's part of what has led to some of the issues that we're having now. We've really worked to ensure that residents get access to the information the first time. And some examples of that are folks have come in and FOIA'd information relating to police misconduct records and the way sales tax dollars are generated. And what we've seen with that is, when it came to police misconduct records, someone placed a FOIA, the police department said that they sent off the information, and when we looked in the system, the requester several weeks later still hadn't received it. And so we put our foot down and we said, we have to make sure that this information is released. We have to make sure that folks understand that government is accountable, and we made sure that information got released. Another thing is that someone came in and FOIA to understand arrest data in the city. And what they discovered with that FOIA was that 75% of all juvenile arrests in our city are of African American youth. And we know that in our city, the African American population is less than 20% of the city. So to account for 75% of all juvenile arrests, we've realized that something is wrong here. Another thing is with sales tax dollars. Folks came in and they FOIA'd to understand how sales tax dollars are generated, and that FOIA was denied initially. And we stepped in and we made sure that we contacted the Attorney General's office and the proper authorities to ensure that those records were released, to ensure that folks understand how their tax dollars are generated and how their tax dollars are spent. And so that's been the movement of the clerk's office for the last 2 years, and that's what I hope to continue empowering folks, to continue bringing folks like Governor Quinn to Evanston and others who are leading great initiatives to empower residents.
Well, I'm sitting between two history makers. I've known Bennett since Bennett helped Noah build a boat a long time ago. And Devon, who I got together with at the very end of last year, we were down at City Hall. I was with my Congressman, Danny Davis, and I told Devon that we were planning to pass a petition to have the power of initiative and referendum. And he said, well, why don't we try that here in Evanston? And that's how our whole movement began, really, because of Devon's interest and his commitment, as you know, to the freedom of information. And information sets us free. And I believe in grassroots democracy, organizing at the grassroots. I was lucky enough to go to President Obama's last speech in Chicago right before he left office. And it was a huge crowd down there at McCormick Place. But he said, you know, don't only use the internet and social media to organize. That's important. We heard that earlier. But he said, grab a clipboard and get out and get signatures for candidates and for causes you believe in. And I've been doing that for a long time. We started a group a long time ago called the Citizen Utility Board to fight for consumers against big utilities. And the only way we were able to get it on the ballot was through gathering signatures on a petition, and then the people voted for it. And so I really believe in this whole movement of referendum where you put issues on the ballot, and then the people can take charge. And here in Evanston, obviously, there's some needs to be improved. The city council, I think, needs some, and the mayor needs some leadership. And that's what initiative is. If you go to Wisconsin, or you go to Missouri, or you go to Ohio, go to Michigan, all of those states allow everybody in municipalities to have the power to gather signatures on a petition, and then in their city, put the issue on the ballot for the people to vote on. Now, a long time ago, well, maybe not that long time ago, in August of 1963, there was a woman from Chicago on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial when Dr. King on August 28th was making his immortal speech, I Have a Dream, and a woman from Chicago, Mahalia Jackson, she said right near the end of his speech, "Tell him about the dream, Martin. Tell him about the dream." And that's when Dr. King riffed it into his immortal words about I Have a Dream. And it was a woman from Chicago, Mahalia Jackson, who got him going on that. And matter of fact, Mahalia Jackson always said that she sang for free for the walking people. And Dr. King, if you saw the movie Selma, in the middle of the night, he got up one night and he called Mahalia Jackson, long distance. They don't have that anymore, but he called long distance. Mahalia Jackson, he asked her to sing him a hymn, his favorite hymn, after midnight. And so to me, the way you make change is not from the top down. It's from the grassroots up. And so what we're doing here in Evanston is gathering signatures. I think we got to get about 2,908 signatures, something like that, by December 16th of this year in order to put on the ballot when we vote for presidential nominations there in March in the primary, a referendum that says, should the people of Evanston have the power of voter, petition, and referendum to consider city ordinances. This empowers people. Just looking at the sign over here, we have to have respect, we have to have power, we have to have inclusion, and we have to have you. So that's why I'm here. Thank you very much.
I wish people would stop calling Donald Trump a racist and calling out all the racist things that he says. And don't get me wrong, I am sure that Trump believes that black people are inferior and that they deserve less, and that is disgusting. But what we need to keep at the front of our minds is that Donald Trump got his start in the 1970s with his father in a Coney Island real estate development. That development was called, what else? Trump Village, because he puts his name on everything. He would put his name on me. And that place did not rent to African Americans. Now, the federal government sued him, he settled, whatever. Did he do that because he didn't like black people? No, he doesn't, but that's not why he wouldn't rent to them. He wouldn't rent to them because he wanted to protect and increase the value of his property. And what do his supporters say they most respect him for? Making deals and making money. Donald Trump's entire success story is built on a foundation of institutional racism. Real estate wealth is that foundation, and it is what we middle-class people have in common with him, whether we despise him or not. So the toxic sludge that comes out of Trump's mouth keeps us stuck on a kind of white power that is easiest to see, and that costs people nothing to denounce. So we need to fight institutional racism, but to do that, we need to recognize that institutional racism is respected racism. That seems like an oxymoron, respected racism. But what I mean is that it takes the form of things that look like achievements. Owning a home, living in a neighborhood with trees and parks, running for political office and winning, and then not getting harassed for doing your job. Every single one of these, owning your home, living in a beautiful place, it's based on a system that is rigged. Nobody is going to publicly denounce home ownership, and even if we did, nothing would change. Condemnation cannot be the only tool that we have to fight racism. Trump takes up too much air, so does condemning Trump and debating what he ought to be condemned for. The conversation that we need to be having is about reparations, because people who benefit from a rigged system owe something to the people whom that system is rigged against. And the people whom that system is rigged against have a rightful claim to justice, not charity. And if you want justice, you have to take power. So the point of this day is to talk about various ways that you can take power. And to this question, should the people of Evanston have the power to propose ordinances? We have to answer that question with another question. Is this a democracy? Well, if it's a democracy, then hell yes. So we have that in Michigan. We used that power in Michigan through voters, not politicians, to end gerrymandering in Michigan. Gerrymandering is one of the biggest things that locks progressives and black people and brown people, all of us who are on the same side, it locks us out of power. So the struggle for justice starts with the struggle for power, and the struggle for power starts with signatures and clipboards.
My movement started with growing up and knowing that my uncle worked very closely with Martin Luther King during segregation times, right? Now, my name is put as Fred on the flyer, so I'm going to read a quote from him. And it goes as this: "Some men may little note or soon forget what we say here, but the nation will never forget what we did here together. We were not satisfied with the few scattering cracks in the segregation wall and decided to effect a major confrontation with evil." Okay? Because the way we live in our communities is a crime. My community is littered with vacant lots and vacant buildings that once housed people. And now the same people can't go into the houses that they grew up in without getting arrested. See, systematic racism and poverty go hand in hand. You can't have one without the other, right? We have these systems that perpetuate poverty in our school systems with the lack of funding for books or the closing of our schools, right? We have incarceration where me as a black man am 7 times more likely to get arrested, right? And then we have our destructured families where we have single mothers raising kids. Okay, all these things perpetuate systematic racism and poverty. Now, when I became a part of the Poor People's Campaign, and I found out that over 140 million people are living low income and impoverished, that's not all black people, right? So it's gonna take, in this equation, really, not division, which this narrative does. It tries to divide us through color, through race, through sexuality, through religion. But this equation is going to take our multiplication, coming together to really affect this, to fuse all our interests together to really make change. So I'm really glad to be here. I want everybody to, at the end of this, talk to us at the Poor People's Campaign, because we really have to fuse our interests together if we really want to make a change and dismantle this system. It's going to take all of us to fuse together, and that's where we stand.
So the obstacles, it's just like anything in life. You don't grow unless you have obstacles, and you don't succeed unless you get over those obstacles. So an obstacle is not something that you should be intimidated by. It's a challenge. And this guy here, you don't know how, he just talked about what he's doing now. But years ago when we were 2 or 3 years younger, he was always on a project. If there was something new to be done to change government, you knew Pat Quinn was doing it. And so it's not new for this voter initiative. That's the way he rolls.
If you don't vote, you don't count. So it really is important what Devin said, to make sure that this ward, and for that matter, everybody you can, to get them to vote in the coming elections of 2020. And one of the reasons I'm so committed to this whole power of petition and referendum is it encourages people to understand that I'm not only voting for candidates, but there are issues. We heard some of the issues here today that are important, whether it's making sure people get a fair share of government money and construction dollars, or making sure that people have decent schools and raise the minimum wage. That in Seattle, the whole movement for $15 minimum wage began with a petition drive, and they put it on the ballot. And so there are a lot of issues here in Illinois dealing with gun safety. When I was governor, we were trying to get a bill to limit high-capacity magazines that are used in these assault weapons. And it came up 2 votes short in the Senate. And I was very unhappy with the Senate President. His own cousin voted no. He told me in DuPage County, where I grew up, he said, oh no, people in my district, they're not for limiting high-capacity ammunition magazines. And I had brought in the families from Newtown, Connecticut, to testify on how important this was to save lives. And if that killer out there didn't have such a high-capacity ammunition magazine, many of those little first and second graders wouldn't have been killed. So the family came to Springfield and had them stay at the governor's mansion. We went over to the state capitol, and we're hearing some of these blowhard politicians saying, we're afraid of the NRA. Well, we are not afraid of the NRA. That's what petition and referendum is all about.
So here in Evanston, one of the reasons that I ran for office was to bring a voice that isn't traditionally at the table to the table. When our city council and our mayor put forward a proposal to temporarily opt out of the minimum wage, I think I brought one of the singular voices to the table to say, we can't do this, not just because it's bad policy, not just because of the illegal nature of the meeting and bring it forward without 48-hour notice, but because what we're doing is we're actually causing an emergency for folks who are low income. If you've ever worked for minimum wage, you know that you plan your paycheck to the dime. And if you're expecting a $2 raise, and the day before that raise is to take place, your city opts out, that creates an emergency for you. And one of the ways, and for me stepping up and standing out against that, I started to face a lot of pushback from our city council and from folks within the city. One of the ways that I, am overcoming that, or hopefully working toward overcoming that, is that I rely primarily on the fact that I'm an elected official and that there's nothing that they can really do to me, but I rely on you folks out in the audience. I rely on you folks to be educated, to understand what's going on in government, and to vote. Right now we're sitting in, of course, the Fleetwood Jourdain Center, and what we know is that in 1932, in fact we found this in the minutes and I think we turned it over to Dino when we found it, is that was it 1932 or 33?
1931 when we started fighting for the center.
In 1931, I believe, it was Mr. Jourdain won election in 1931. In the city council, he was the first African American elected to the Evanston City Council, as we know. The city council then voted to dismiss him from the council based on trumped up charges of voter fraud. They found a few ballots they found a few cases where folks, were maybe living in storefronts or living in places that weren't properly zoned as housing. And they used that to extrapolate out and say, well, your whole election was fraud, and they kicked him out of office. And Mr. Jourdain came back a year later or so, won election again, and came back and became a strong voice for the African American community here in Evanston and for the entire city, advocating for the construction of this community center, advocating to desegregate our beaches and parks. And so what I hold on to is knowing that, and what helps me get over the hurdle is knowing that we have smart, dedicated people out in our community, and that I am ultimately accountable to you, and that is what will help us keep this movement going forward of increasing transparency here in our city and making government services more accessible to everyone in the city.
I think we all have key points in our lives that, make us woke. My key point started in kindergarten. And I saw this system of hierarchy about leadership and lack of leadership. So I was living a mission as early as kindergarten that I borrowed from a sports apparel company, Nike. Just do it. That's my motivation. Every time somebody said no, I just did it. So kindergarten, when I woke up, a peer of mine, as I was playing with this toy, well, actually it was clay, making my car out of clay. In my mind, it was a Porsche, 2 scale, everything. Really, it looked like a block like this with 2 wheels on it. But hey, I put a lot of effort in this. And this kid came up to me and stomped on my hands and on the clay and said, "Niggers are not allowed to play with toys." The teacher was 3 feet away from me. She looked at me, looked at him, and turned away. I had a moment in that time, later that day as I thought about it, that this kid did not learn it on his own. The kid learned it from his parents and is supported by leadership in the community, in facilities. And I had a choice to either regress, become violent, or be assertive. At that moment in my life, the very next day of kindergarten, my motto was, nobody can tell me what I can and can't do. And I applied that with how I developed Shorefront. When I went into local organizations and asked to see our history, and I said, well, you guys didn't do anything, and you can't do this. And I said, no, you don't tell me that. I want to do this, I want to prove you wrong. And unfortunately, the pushbacks that I get come from institutions. You're not allowed to do this. You don't have the right policies to do it. You don't have the degree to do this. You're not using the right terminology. How is this significant? Where's the paperwork? Give me a moment, I'll get that paperwork. But you don't tell me no, you don't tell me that the entire community is worthless. That's my motivation every day. That's what keeps me going, to put marginalized communities on a map with a voice.
Information is one of the best ways of getting over obstacles. All these problems that we think are insurmountable, they're not. The solutions are probably not easy, but the more we know about issues, the more likely we are to find solutions. And it takes digging, and it takes looking on social media. It takes not just reading the Evanston Roundtable, which is not going to help you understand anything that is going on in Evanston. It takes information, and then information opens up points of action that you didn't know existed. So, I could tell a person, but I just wanted to say that instead.
I've had a few obstacles, really, but one in particular comes as a story. My younger sister was having a cotillion coming out event, very special for young ladies, right? And everyone there, the family is dressed really nice. Everybody's there, grandma, mom, dad, brothers, sisters, right? So it's a beautiful time. I want to leave though, beat the rush back home, get back, get all these clothes off. So my wife at the time and my younger brother were leaving the Marriott downtown Chicago on our way home. So as we're crossing the street, police cars turn the corner and it's on the same side of the street as us. Did I mention we were dressed to kill? Right. So the police car, the officers get out, and then they call me over to the car. They say, come here, put your hands on the car. I'm like, wait a minute, what for? I'm just coming from, the Marriott across the street, my little sister's cotillion, I have the booklet in my hand, I have the tickets and everything. They said, no, put your hands on the car, you fit the description of a thief. I said, damn. Well, where did I rob? Fort Knox or something, or one of these department stores on Michigan Avenue, right? So they proceed to put me in the car in handcuffs, and they drive me to a McDonald's. I said, damn. They're waiting for the manager to come out and identify me. I said, this is where I'm supposed to have robbed McDonald's? So of course, the manager couldn't identify me because I didn't rob the McDonald's, right? So they couldn't arrest me for robbing McDonald's, so they arrested me for disorderly conduct, right? So that was just one of the obstacles that I had to overcome. But what really made me overcome it was, I read a story about my uncle. On Christmas Eve, 1954, Ku Klux Klan put 14 sticks of dynamite and blew his house up with him in it, his wife, and his 4 children. And they escaped with barely a scratch, right? And this is in, if you look it up online, you'll see it. But the caption that I was able to read in one of the books was, the police officers that were standing outside of his home said, hey, Shuttlesworth, if I were you, boy, I'd get out of town, right? And his response was, God didn't save me to be afraid of you or to leave town. So that's just one of the things that really helped me to keep going, you know, to persevere, to really get involved, to join with people that are doing things to really change and dismantle this society. And it's going to take all of us. It's not a color issue, it's a human issue, and it's going to take humans to change it. Thank you.
The importance of community support, just like the example that Devon said about the black community got together and put their pools of money to raise $10,000 to open up that Emerson Street Branch YMCA. That was matching funds. Federal governments and granting entities do not fund things that community does not support. So one of the first things grantors look for are, how is the community supporting you? And if I go to them and say, oh, I got 5 community members that donated, $5 each, that's $25, a granting entity will say, okay, we can match that $25, so now I got $50. A real impact would say, City of Evanston is behind Shorefront 100%, we're donating a building which is worth value of $2 million, I could write a grant now for $1 million to support that. That's real money. If every black household, every household in the North Shore supported Shorefront with even just $10, that could generate what I calculate at the time, I think $75,000 a year. $75,000 a year. I could write grant money to support that, and we have a real operation. So we have to start thinking outside of the box of, okay, we don't have this access to this, how can it affect change? Then we find the core of that, go to that, and influence change within that structure to make change, to make opportunities for me in the end that benefit the community.
Years ago, there was a youth commission, and one of my concerns is getting kids involved in what's going on. Particularly, this was a group of high school kids who used to actually go before the council and speak. They got rid of the youth commission when they found out, rather than do something about the person who was the staff person, who used the kids' money without their permission, they just got rid of the commission. We need to get kids involved. And so, and I'm even willing to put my old self in there and help. But we need to get kids involved. My second really quick thing is Dr. Dish. When you said about not using, if I remember correctly, the term racist for Trump, I use that word with a collection of other words. I can't say that. But I want to ask you, if we can't use that word, is there another one that you find adequate?
No, I'm glad you asked, because I knew that I was risking being misunderstood. I don't think that is gonna get us very far. He's obviously a racist, and he's every other thing that you and I both think about him. But denouncing his racism, people are spending so much time. I mean, NPR every day. Should we be calling him a racist? Should we be saying when he talks about shithole countries and Baltimore in the way he does, should we say he's a racist? Shut up. It's not interesting and it's not helpful. What we need to talk about in this country is institutional racism, right? And what Trump is the ugly face of racism, and it's just on our TV, and it's horrible. Not that I didn't ever think it was there, it's just grotesque to have it in my face every day. But the hard part of racism in America is respected racism, right? It's so-and-so is in authority. It's, oh, I own my home. I'm so sorry that you couldn't hold on to yours. I guess it was because you lost your job and maybe you didn't work hard enough in it, right? That's the kind of racism that we need to talk about, this racism that doesn't show, right? So, yeah, call him anything. Call him, oh my God, call him anything except president, right?
So I want to talk to the first part of the question, because I have a lot of thoughts about Trump that I usually keep to myself. It wouldn't be politic. So young people getting involved in local government, and particularly. I was when I ran for office, I think I was the only candidate who had a large group of high school students regularly coming out and volunteering for my campaign, using my campaign as their there's an elective class that the students have. It's senior studies, yes. Using my campaign as their senior studies program. And what it was is that they had a candidate, I believe, that they felt that they could relate to and understand and was pushing policies that they believed in. I think that's the way we start to get young people involved. We represent the policies of tomorrow, today, with those students. And one of the things that I have pushed for is participatory budgeting. That's a system where folks have direct control over a pot of money and decide how that money is spent. In Chicago, in the 49th Ward, that was introduced to America using infrastructure dollars to street paving, light post, and the such. But a very interesting experiment happened in the 27th Ward, which is Alderman Walter Burnett. They used TIF dollars, which are economic development dollars. And in that ward, what they did was they turned over, I think it was $2 million of TIF money to the community and said, come together, figure out how we're going to spend this in our community. And what the community did was they chose to do facade improvements along a corridor of Chicago Avenue. There was a hair braiding academy that was funded and started. With the facade improvements that happened along Chicago Avenue, they also hired a local man to do those improvements, a local construction company. There was also a skate park that was built. And the skate park was pushed by young folks in the community. And when they went to the Department of Planning for Chicago, and they said, hey, we want a skate park in this West Side community, this predominantly African-American West Side community, the Department of Planning, from what was told to us by the aldermen and organizers, was like, you're putting a skate park there? What are you doing? But they said, well, no, the community wanted this. The community came together and voted for this. They don't want a basketball court, they want a graffiti skate park. And that is what is being built in the community. What's great about that experiment is the greatest number of participants were African American youth, particularly African American men between the ages of 18 and 24. There is no other system that I can point to in our democracy where you have that kind of participation amongst young folks, especially young men of color, willingly. And this is why I think instituting programs like that in Evanston, where you give real power to people in our community, not just you go to the ballot box and you get to vote and maybe your candidate wins or maybe they don't, but real power over how your tax dollars and how your community is governed. That will get more young folks involved. That will get more people involved in general. And when you do that, you're not only educating folks for that particular issue, but you're showing them that they can have a real voice and hopefully increasing voter turnout in regular elections as well.
Pat Quinn, can you talk about the Evanston Voter Initiative and how it's not going to turn us into crazy California or Florida? Because that's one of the things that I've heard people say when we've been asking for signatures.
Well, basically, the people of California are very happy with the power that they have. Just what you heard from Devin here, if you wanted to get participatory budgeting in Evanston, you could put that idea on the ballot and people could vote yes or no on it. And you'd have to get a certain number of signatures, generally about 2,800, to qualify it for the ballot. But really, the whole power of petition and referendum began in the Midwest more than 100 years ago in places like Chicago and Illinois. Jane Addams, who was the first woman to be awarded the Nobel Peace Prize 100 years ago. She was alive. She lived in Chicago. She was born near Rockford. And she said the cure for the ills of democracy is more democracy. And so she was a big believer in initiative, the idea that it isn't just the insiders who are the incumbents who make all the decisions. I think you've seen here in Evanston, Devin knows firsthand that sometimes the insiders, the aldermen and the mayor, they don't have all the answers. So the idea of petition and referendum, it's a safety valve. It allows the people at large to say, well, we're going to go around the insiders, the incumbents. We'll put something on the ballot for all the people to vote on. Now, as Bennett said, it's not easy. Getting to 2,809 signatures to qualify this idea for the ballot takes a lot of work. I was here for the 4th of July picnic, and I hope to come for one of the farmers markets you have every Saturday. And I believe in what Barack Obama said. Grab a clipboard. This is the one we use in Chicago, term limit the mayor. That's the old mayor, Rahm Emanuel. Believe me, people did sign our petition. We got 87,355 names to put it before the voters. And so I really think this is a movement that Evanston can teach a lot of other communities in Illinois. And what Allison just said, is this about California? Well, are the people of Wisconsin, every single city there, are the people of Missouri, every city there, are the people of Ohio, every city there, the people of Michigan, every city there, are they smarter than us? They all have this power, and they've had it for 100 years. So we're a little bit behind, but what I plan to do and help the cause, I live in Chicago on the west side, not too far from Chicago Avenue, where you just mentioned, but I believe in a grassroots democracy. And that's how we started the Citizen Utility Board. It's started in 1983. It was all because Commonwealth Edison, they didn't want it, politicians didn't want it, but the people, the consumers did. And that's how we got our own consumer group. And I think it's very, very important that we, right here in Evanston, show the rest of Illinois what the people can do and put it on the March ballot. Got to file the signatures by December 16th of this year. That's a very important date in American history. It was where a group of folks who didn't like King George threw a bunch of tea into Boston Harbor, Boston Tea Party. It was also the day that I was born, and it was also the day my son David was born. So that's a daily double and a trifecta if you count the Boston Tea Party.
Yes, and so one of the things I want to say, you mentioned World War II, and the president at the time was, if I'm not wrong, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And when we think about institutional racism, or institutional sexism, or institutional anything, almost all of these things are codified in law. They're codified as rules. And Franklin D. Roosevelt said that rules are not necessarily sacred, principles are. So remember to stand by principle, remember to remove your blinders and look through for the truth in what's going on, and hold your principles true, and make sure that your principles are represented in our government. So, thank you.